It's such a pleasure to see you all again, to be here. It's been over 5 years, and we can feel the vibrancy here. It's alive because you're preaching, you're distributing books, and you're hearing and chanting together. And thank you for such a major contribution to the Krishna consciousness movement. Thank you for your leadership, Nilamada Bapu, your enthusiasm. You reminded me of my first temple president, who was Dāsa, and he had a similar way about him that he uplifted everybody with a smile and with deep enthusiasm for the Sankirtan movement. Hare Krishna. That's first time you've ever been here? Okay. Okay, first time. Anybody who's new to Krishna consciousness, who's never heard of Hare Krishna before, and you just accidentally walked in? Nice to meet you. My name's Vaish. You're from here?
Yes, I'm from Baltimore.
Pleasure to meet you. And first time?
Yes.
First time. You look like you've been around Krishna consciousness before, though. Isn't it?
No.
Never. Okay. Good to know. While I speak, I'll frame things in a way so as to give you context for some of the things I say, so that it'll be more meaningful. Firstly, when we begin these kinds of discussions and talks, first it'll be more of a talk, and then probably discussion, and followed with some energy towards an objective we have around the world, which is to together distribute the books of knowledge that we have here. One of the most important ones is called the Srimad Bhagavatam, and I'll talk a little bit about it tonight. It is a book which goes into detail about the purpose of life and how to attain it. It's actually said to be reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. It's a nice mission statement. And I'll first offer my respects to my spiritual master, who is the founder of this movement. I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time in California, because this movement started around 1965, when the founder came from India on a boat, not like a small rowboat or something, but on a ship, but it was not meant for passengers as much as it was meant for cargo, bringing shipments from a port in Calcutta, India, to America. It's still a viable port. It's still the place from which in India most of the goods transfer back and forth from the east coast of the United States to India, back and forth. And he came with no money. It's a bit of a story, because he was, in his youth, introduced to a very powerful spiritual teacher named Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And he had taken up the purpose in his heart that he would like to help the world and the people of the world by spreading knowledge. The person that he met, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and I'm talking about the founder now. When I say he, I'm talking about my teacher and the founder of this organization. He had met his teacher, who had pointed out to him that despite the circumstances of the world, each one of us has to deal with our own individual internal circumstances. And the more we're able to improve ourselves from the inside out, the more we're able to navigate the world in a skillful way, and also the more good we can do for people all over the world. He also pointed out that temporary fixes are just that, they're temporary. They don't help people permanently. For instance, there are ways in which, and important ways in which we tend to take care of our bodies and our minds and so forth. But although those are helpful and necessary in many cases, they don't represent the ultimate good we can do for others. The concept of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, which represents what the ancient wisdom texts talk about, is that the highest good you can do for others is remind them of the purpose of human life, which these ancient texts say is spiritual. They say that we're not these physical or mental bodies. These are temporary vehicles that we're in now, and they have a life cycle. They have a shelf life. And no matter what you do, nowadays if you listen to enough YouTube videos, you might get the idea that maybe you could live forever if you just eat the right diet and exercise in the right way. But despite that, there's a powerful influence of time in this world that brings everything to its demise, including our bodies. So the concept of these ancient wisdom texts and what my teacher's teacher was saying was that the most important thing for all human beings is to improve spiritually, to learn the techniques of spiritual practice so that one can feel enlightened, one can have integrity, one can rise above qualities like anger or greed, and realize ultimately that we're really not meant for this world. This world is a stopover. And the context of the world is more presented in these ancient wisdom texts as a classroom. This is a place of learning, and we're not meant to stay here forever. We're meant to learn what we need to learn and move on. And you've probably heard of the idea of reincarnation. This is a concept that the Bhagavad Gita discusses in very practical terms, saying that we're actually reincarnating right now, because the body's always changing. Reincarnate means that the mass of the body is changing. Even as we're sitting here, you don't have the same body you came in with, or even the one that I referred to 30 seconds ago. It's like a river. It's constantly changing, and if you step in a river and then you come back and step in it again 5 minutes ago, although you call it the same thing, it's not the same. It's changed. It just looks like something that's substantial. So the body's in that category. But we, the consciousness within the body, which is personal, you can think about who you are and ascertain that you have an identity. That identity, according to the famous book called Bhagavad Gita, is permanent. We have a personal identity, but it's not the body. I may say I am an American, but I could change that and become Swiss. I don't know what that would entail, but I could do it if I put my mind to it. And there are ways in which the body is the most important in my mind, but actually, according to the wisdom text, it's not the most important. The most important aspect of the body is our self, which is us, the consciousness within. So based on that, my teacher had taken these very deep lessons to heart, and he thought about how he would be able to do the greatest good for people over the world. And it was a very interesting circumstance, because when my teacher, who's named Prabhupada, who's on this ornate seat here, which is called a Vaiśeṣika, when somebody's representing the tradition and passing down the original knowledge to others, they're given respect based on the fact that they're a representative. And he had a foundation in this knowledge system from his father and from his family and from the culture he lived in. But he found that it was convoluted. There wasn't a really clear avenue for following a process. There are many different ideas. And when he met his spiritual teacher, who gave him complete clarity on how to practice it, and asked him, even when he was a young man, he met his teacher, and his teacher said, please bring this to the West and give it to the people in the West, because it's been in India for a long time, these knowledge systems like yoga, meditation, self-realization, as you've probably heard. So he took it to heart, my teacher, and he incubated that idea for quite some time. He was a family man at the time, and a student, then a family man, and he also had a business to support himself, so he was quite busy. But he was always thinking about how to do good for the world. How would he carry the same kind of teaching that his teacher had asked him to carry to the world, to do good for people? And at a particular time in his life, his business, which was very promising for a long time, had just had the bottom fall out of it, really. There were a series of incidents where he lost the business. And then in India, there's this tradition when you get older that you should start getting more involved with your spiritual practice and maybe travel with your family to spiritual places, and everyone in the family develop a taste for spiritual practice. But his family was not cooperative. Although he was more and more interested in spiritual practice, his family was less and less interested, which led to a separation. And at a particular time, he had accepted an order of life like a monk. So he lived in a very, very simple way, and he went to a holy place in India called Vrindavan. And there he had rented a very small room, which is still there. Thousands of people go there to see it every year. And in that room, he started on an old typewriter typing the manuscript for a book called Srimad Bhagavatam. The book's been around for thousands of years, but it's never been properly translated into English, nor has it been given clear commentary. And he did that for some years with the intention of coming to America, but how do you get to America without any money or without any visa? Sorry to bring up the word visa. At one point, while he was there, living simply but spending most of his time writing in India, he had gotten an invitation from Japan to come to a conference, the cultivation of the human spirit, it was called. And there's a record of the letters that our founder and my teacher had written in order to try to get funding from the Indian government to go there and present at the conference as a representative of the tradition that we're following here of Bhakti Yoga. But it wasn't forthcoming. After a volley of letters and doing due diligence in every way possible, he wasn't able to get the funds. Meanwhile, he wrote a book, and the book is called The Light of the Bhagavat. The Light of the Bhagavat is a summary of one of the chapters of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it takes lessons from nature to aid us in remembering Krishna, the Supreme. That book never got published because his trip never got approved. However, posthumously, his disciples had found the manuscript and then published it. In fact, it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj who had taken it to Hong Kong and hired a Chinese artist to illustrate the book. You may not have any now because I don't think it's been printed that much. But it's a beautiful book. But I'm just bringing it up as part of Prabhupada's repertoire he was developing that he wanted to present to Catonsville, Baltimore, and any other place in the West, as the West hadn't heard of this before. And meanwhile, he started working on a magazine called Back to Godhead. It wasn't so easy because he was alone. If any of you have ever published a book, forget a book, just a pamphlet. Even if you make a pamphlet, it's a lot of work, isn't it? You got to check it 5 times, make sure there's no typos, the design has to be nice. Books are like building a house. I've only written 2 books, but I can say it's like building a house from the ground up. There's so many aspects that I never thought, I never imagined. In any case, he wrote 3 books. It was actually the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam in 3 volumes, and he had produced that while he was there in Vrindavan, the small town I mentioned. And when he he wrote another book called Easy Journey to Other Planets. Do you like the title? Yes. Like go to another planet? Check it out. It was a title meant to attract people in the West. And the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is this massive writing on self-realization. It's 12 cantos altogether. Right now, in our set of Bhagavatams, how many volumes altogether? 18. And then there's a smaller set. It's not available here right now, like 40 volumes. It's the same amount of text, but it's just divided into... But it's a massive work. It's said to be 18,000 verses in it. So he started working on that with the idea that he'd bring it to the West, and he did. So when he came to the West, he, as I began, was able to beg passage on a cargo ship because he knew the owner of the steamship company. So he was a saintly person, and he was giving lectures in India in small venues, but one of his fans was the owner of a steamship company. Her name was Sumati Murarji. And he had gone to her office and said, I have to go to the West. At this time, he was 69 years old. I kind of know what that feels like because I'll be 68 this year. So I'm starting to understand what that means. And she reluctantly gave him a free passage because although she admired him, she thought it was lunacy for him to set out at 69 years alone with no money to go to a foreign country. Let's speak of America or New York City. And she at first had refused him, and he sat outside her office and refused to eat or leave until she relented, which she did. Made facility for him on a cargo ship, as I mentioned, and made a trip over, which was a harrowing trip. If you've ever been on a boat, it's not that comfortable. You see water all the time. You can become nauseous. In fact, it's a nautical term, nauseous. Just water everywhere. Not a drop, ne'er a drop to drink. And he had 2 heart attacks. He was not in great health while he was on the journey. And he wrote a journal on the boat, and that's been published. And what he talked about in his journal was his plan. Part of it is his plan, how he would be able to inculcate this process of spiritual realization to the world. Because that was his mission, get the whole world. Imagine you have no money, you have no supporters, you're 69 years old, and your conception is, your mission statement is, cover the whole world. And I may have mentioned that he brought the books with him, but I don't think I gave a clear idea of how many. There are about 400 sets of this 3-volume first canto, and they were in trunks, and they got loaded on the boat after Prabhupada got in Calcutta, down near the tip of India around Colombo. And he landed in America, and it said, Prabhupada had said before, he only had 35 rupees. They were not convertible. I don't know if they are now. You can convert rupees, right? Back then you couldn't. We didn't have the same relationship, America and India, back then. And rupees didn't do it for anybody here in America at that time. Anyway, 35, even if they did, would have got him a pear or an apple or something. And some people say he didn't have any money, but actually I researched it, and he had $25 US because the ship captain had accepted a set of his Bhagavatams, the 3 volumes. He bought it, and he gave $25 for it on the boat. Yay! Good to know, right? I always wondered also where he put the boxes, because they're huge trunks, almost 400 sets of the first canto, and then I found out from Brahmananda, and he told me that the Scindia Steamship Company had their own storage in New York, because they're a shipping company, so they afforded Prabhupada a free storage there for his books, and kept them there until he was able to attract a couple of students, which he did by going out by himself into a park in New York City and chanting, which, by the way, when he first started, the police came over and said, "You can't sit here." So he moved under a tree. And there's a famous tree now with a placard on it in New York City where he did sit, and his first followers were Achyutananda and Brahmananda, who came in and danced and started appreciating his chanting, and more people came, and he held open class in Bhagavad Gita. And then he took Brahmananda and Gargamuni, their brothers, to the warehouse where the books were stored, and he had them tie them together, 3 volumes, with string, so that they were one set each, and they didn't get separated. Brahmananda told me that some of the books had already been sold, and some of the sets were not complete, just a few. And Prabhupada himself had, before he met Brahmananda and Gargamuni, gone around New York City alone and distributed some of them, because Brahmananda told me that he had gone to a bookstore when he, in earnest, took up the idea of distributing the Srimad Bhagavatam. It was called Orientalia. It was a bookstore that carried metaphysical books and books from Asia. And the owner came out to see what Brahmananda wanted to sell him, to put in his shop, and he said, "Oh yeah, an elderly gentleman came here a while back, and he said he gave me this pastry that had vegetables inside. He had made some samosa or something that he was distributing, prasadam. It's spiritual food that is meant to uplift the consciousness." And Brahmananda also mentioned to me that when Prabhupada was in New Delhi, he had distributed his Srimad Bhagavatam to the Library of Congress. That's here, well, not here, but it's in Washington, D.C. You'll notice it's 3 or 4 blocks long. The Library of Congress is an archive for the most important books, and members of, I don't know if they actually read them these days. It seems like maybe not. A lot of the politicians and so forth have access to those libraries to read up so they can be more civilized. That's why I say I don't know if anybody's reading. So there's a system around the world with the Library of Congress that there are branches in various places, and they'll take books and then they'll assimilate them into various parts of the system around the world, including major libraries. One of the major libraries of the world is in New York City, the New York Public Library, which we know well because we used to distribute books outside it a lot. And Prabhupada had sold 12 sets of his Srimad Bhagavatam to the Library of Congress in Delhi. And then those got dispatched to various places around the world, and one of them was the New York Public Library in New York City. And when Prabhupada arrived in New York City, the books preceded him by 1 year. Yeah, wow. It's far out, right? There's a way in which Brahmananda said Prabhupada used to go there regularly to visit those books. And Brahmananda said it took him 2 or 3 bus transfers to get uptown to that place, because Prabhupada lived in a different, the place that was a little further away. And Brahmananda said to me, That was Prabhupada's entertainment. He was checking to see also if the books had been checked out. On the Jaladuta, which is the name of the cargo ship that he took passage on and came to America, the journal I mentioned before has Prabhupada's innermost thoughts about how he would make his conquest of the world. And he specifically says it's by promoting the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he quoted a passage, it's actually a paragraph from the first canto, second chapter of Bhagavatam, which many of you know, and you can say it with me if you like. I'm going to say it in Sanskrit. Shushusho Shuradhanasya Vasudeva Katarishi Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipra Punyatirtana Shevana Shinvatam Swa Kata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hrijantaksto Hibhadrani Vidunoti Suritsatam Nashta Prayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Tada Rajastamo Bhava Kamalobha Dayaschaye Chaitayater Anavidam Stitam Sattve Prasidati Evam Prasanna Manaso Bhagavad Bhakti Yogata Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam Mukta Sangasya Jayate Vidyate Hridaya Grantish Chijante Sarva Samshaya Shiyante Chasya Karmani Shrishtaeva Manishvare Evam Prasanna Manaso Bhagavad Bhakti Yogata Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam Mukta Sangasya Jayate Vidyate Hridaya Grantish Chijante Sarva Samshaya Shiyante Chasya Karmani Drishtaeva Manishvare. This paragraph Prabhupada quotes in several places, and other places in the Bhagavad Gita in his commentary to the first verse of the seventh chapter, where Krishna, who spoke the Bhagavad Gita to his student Arjuna, says that if you practice hearing about me and about the process of Krishna consciousness, then you'll be able to come to know everything, phenomenal and numinous. And in the series of verses we just said, the Srimad Bhagavatam announces that the process of self-realization begins with service to great souls, those who are highly elevated. They call them Mahatma. Atma means a self and Maha means great. So a great person is known as somebody who's compassionate, who's conquered the virulent senses and is able to do good for others in all times, places, and circumstances. It's a great soul, saintly people. If you do service for such personalities, then you also become elevated, it says. And what's the symptom of your elevation? It's that you become attracted to the subject matter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then, by regularly hearing the subject matter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, whatever anomalies are there within your own heart, if you've ever noticed, sometimes they creep up on you. Have you ever had unwanted habits creep up on you?
Yes.
See if there's anybody out. There's two people. Yes. Yeah, everybody say yes. I know you probably it never happened, but just say yes because you make me feel better. Because I'm swimming in it all the time. And it says that a miracle happens because you can read 1,008 self-help books and maybe temporarily be a good boy or good girl for a while, but then all of a sudden you notice, what happened to me? I was doing so well for a while and then I lost it. And I went back to where I was before. This is a well-known phenomenon. But the Bhagavatam says you can actually have a change of heart by hearing from the Srimad Bhagavatam because it's a vibration that comes from the spiritual world. Elsewhere in the Bhagavatam it says, Tadvag visargo janataga viplavo yasmin pratishlokam abhadyavatyapi, which means that The Srimad Bhagavatam is not from this world, it comes from a different place. It's an import from the spiritual world. The sound gets imported from a higher realm. And when you listen to it, when you repeat it, then it transforms you from the inside out. Nashra prayeshu bhadreshu. Abhadreshu means everything that's bugging you starts to diminish. Nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavat yutama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. And then it says, tada rajas tamo bhava. There's a time at which you'll notice that you're improved. And this word tada means at that time, but we used to have this way of announcing ourselves or something new when we were kids, or even now for that matter. If you come up with something and you want to present it, you say, ta-da! You ever done that? So that's what you can think of in tada rajastamo, ta-da! And it's like, what happened to me? Suddenly, those attractions that I had before that I was disgusted with or embarrassed about, they're just starting to go away. Tada rajastamo bhava kama lobhareyascha. It's naming bad habits or the categories from which the bad habits emanate, which means kama, unbridled desire for stupid stuff. I mean, why do you want that? It's a stupid idea. It's like, I don't know, but I don't care. Unserious mindset that gets us in trouble more and more and more, and again and again and again. So you can become a serious person by giving up these lower qualities, and they become diminished and they go away. Tada rajas tamo bhava kama lobhareyascha cheta eteranadidam stitam sattve prasidati. There's a way in which you start to feel illuminated. Means the lights come on and you have a clarity, a lucidity about you, and the way you see the world, and you notice causality more than you did before, and you're therefore more deliberate in your activities and how you interact with other people. An enlightened person, wouldn't it be nice to have more of them in the world? Yes or yes?
Yes.
And then it says, Evam prasanna manaso bhagavad bhakti yogata bhagavad tattva vijnana muktasan. One of the first symptoms, lo and behold, and something impossible to attain in this world, is that you become happy. Nobody's happy. It's impossible to be happy in the world. There's only we only take defensive measures to overcome the onslaught of miseries. There's no actual happiness, say these ancient wisdom literatures. But for the first time, one can experience for oneself a sense of not just contentment, but more towards being blissful, and for no reason. Not that you won something and all of a sudden you're happy for a few hours until you figure out you got to pay half of it in taxes. It's a natural state of consciousness, which is part of God, to be blissful and happy. And that emerges when the clouds, which are obscuring our true nature, and the clouds are the anomalies created by our association with the material world. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Purusha prakriti stohi bhunte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangosya sarasadyoni janmasu. Whatever good or bad you find, good or bad qualities you find in yourself, or good or bad situations you find yourself in, it's all because of previous associations. So you're lifted above those clouds. You can see yourself. And then it says, Vidyate hridaya grantish chijante sarva samshaya. There's this metaphor for the reason we suffer in the material world is because we're tied to it and can't get free. Even sometimes we see that we don't like what we're doing or what we have or who we are, but we can't cut ourselves free. Well, you get freedom from that. The knot in the heart, that's the metaphor, is cut. And then one starts to see that we've never even been part of this material world at all. We have a relationship with the Supreme, and it's from that point, a very productive and happy life. So this is the progression of events that take place when one reads the Srimad Bhagavatam, and Prabhupada wrote on the Jaladuta about that paragraph that by this book, B-Y, not B-U-Y, but we'll talk about that later, that you will attain something that nobody else can attain. And he also had a sense that everybody should have it. So not only did he bring it in English, but he started traveling around the world and inspiring others who started to feel how the Bhagavatam was working in their life, because he instituted a daily class on the Bhagavatam. Those who were sitting in the classes were feeling uplifted and thinking, how can I also give this to the world? And Prabhupada said, well, why don't you translate it into French so that your fellow human beings here can also appreciate it, and why don't you translate it into German, and how about into Cantonese? Or he wanted every language of the world, because the mission he was on was to reach every town and village of the world, and every town and village means every language. And so now, in the present day, fast forward a lot, the Bhagavatam that Prabhupada brought was finished by him up to the 10th canto, 13th chapter. You can see the last chapter that Prabhupada spoke and gave commentary on when he was ailing. He wasn't able to sit up. He was lying frail on his back. And there's a photo of this with his assistants who were part of his literary team that traveled with him everywhere. One of them's holding the book that Prabhupada used to see the Sanskrit translated, Pradumna translated the verses, but Prabhupada would look at the commentary from previous acharyas and assimilate his own commentary from that, and he'd speak it into a dictaphone, which is precursor to the smartphone or something. You could write books by speaking into it. And then it got transcribed, and then it went into a book, and there was editing, and then it came out. And he got all the way to the 10th canto, 13th chapter. And then he asked that his disciples finish it, which they did, finish the 10th canto. And it's worth mentioning that even while he was at the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, he had taken a slight break from his translating work to write a summary of the 10th canto, because the 10th canto is known to be all important, which is a topic for maybe tomorrow morning's class. So he summarized the whole 10th canto in anticipation, or with the idea that he might not be able to continue because he was failing in health, and his health was failing, and he was also, of course, anything can happen at any time, but he wanted that available to the world. And that came out as a book called Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's a summary of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then his students also wrote the commentary following the method that Prabhupada had used all the way up to the 10th canto, 13th chapter, and then they finished it all the way through the 12th canto to the end. So the book in English is complete. We have the full set of Srimad Bhagavatam, the full 12 cantos. And for years, it's quite a task to print that many books, especially because Prabhupada wanted artwork in them, and a lot of artwork. Painting pictures for a book is not so easy, with the speak of getting them photographed and then put in the book. And it adds a lot of cost to the book, and but Prabhupada wanted pictures in all of his books, and he had them throughout and has them throughout the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. And so printing a lot of books, especially 18, 19 books at a time in a set by the thousands, is quite costly. There was a huge printing of them in Australia, and they lasted for decades because nobody was distributing Srimad Bhagavatam. Well, not nobody. There were a few going out all over the world there may have been 400 or 500 a year going out total. And that started to include India later, because India got started way later after the rest of the world in book distribution. And there were books, Bhagavatam got translated into Hindi and a few other languages. And there were several attempts. One of the attempts was done by one of Prabhupada's students named Hansaduta, who has his students join the Encyclopedia Britannica, because that was, kids, there was a book called Encyclopedia Britannica back in the old days when we used to walk to school in the snow. And so they had sold these books door to door, these full sets, and everybody had one. Nowadays, people just they ask Siri. But that didn't fly, and they tried really hard, and there was another devotee in Australia, I can't remember his name, who was intent on getting sets of Bhagavatam sold all over the world. I'm coming to a conclusion. What's his name? Yasumati Nandan. That was his life and soul, his mission. How can we sell Prabhupada's Bhagavatams? Because why? He took so much trouble. He wanted them to go all over the world. And here they are. There's just a dribble coming out from the stock. And it's still sitting there for so many years. So, several years ago, I was at 2017. I was having a meeting with some of our Sankirtan leaders where we live in ISKCON, Silicon Valley. By the way, my name is Vaish. Nice to meet you. We live in California. That's my wife. We live in a house. And we have a community out there called ISKCON of Silicon Valley. And we have a team of devotees who think of themselves as scientists. And we have a little laboratory out there and try to find ways to distribute books. So I was meeting with a couple of them on January 1st, I think it was 17. And I had found a verse in the 12th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that says, if you give the gift of Srimad Bhagavatam on a golden throne to somebody on Bhadra Purnima, which is around this year, it's September 17th. It changes because it's calculated by the moon, obviously. Then you, the giver, go back to Godhead. It says he reached the supreme destination. I looked, I said, wait a minute. How did I miss this before? I brought it to the other leaders. I said, look at this. I said, what if this became a thing? So I called up my friend Bhima in India. He lives in Bombay. He's a godbrother. He's been interested in book distribution for years and years. And I said, Bhima, look at this. I mean, we all knew it was there. We've all read Prabhupada's books in the book. But this time it just jumped out for some reason. And that began what was called the Bhadra Purnima campaign. And it was that, why don't we try to offer Bhagavatams to everybody in the world? And why wouldn't they take it? Because if they took one and they gave it to a friend, as a giver, they'd just go back to Godhead as a result. And that started, the first year it had a smattering of interest, different places. Some people were against it because they said this will interfere with the end of year marathon. And there was some pushback, but we knew we had a winner. I mean, it was just too obvious the way it jumped out. And it's like, how can you argue with the verse? It's in the Bhagavatam, in the Sanskrit. You can't refute it. So we knew it was a sleeper and it was going to come out. But the first year when we pushed it, a few centers got involved, and total for 2017 we sold 7,000 sets of Bhagavatams. Yeah, we thought it was okay, but it was like... And then for 2018 we said, no, we're really going to push it. So we got in gear and we were pushing hard this way, that way, calling everybody, Bhadra Purnima, still a little pushback. Results for 2018, 7,000. I hate plateaus. And I was almost mad. And I went to a meeting in India, in Tirupati, where all the GBC representatives from the world were at a midterm meeting. And I was invited to come there, and I made an announcement there in front of all the leaders of our organization that we are going, and in front of the deities, so it was a vow, that we're going to distribute at least 10,000 sets of Bhagavatams in 2020. Now, I don't know about you, but when you hear the word 2020, what does it make you think of? I said it in 2019. I had no idea about masks and viruses and, shutdowns and all that kind of stuff. So I made the vow with all the bombast I could muster in my bombastic little heart, and I said it before the deities, and then came 2020. And I remember flying home from India after our yatra and noticing that people on the planes were wearing, a few of them, just 2 or 3 were wearing masks. I'd never seen that before except in Japan, where everybody wears masks for a slight cold. And then, of course, the news rolled in. The NBA shut down around March 10th or something like that. And then one thing after another after another. And then that idea of going from 7,000, 10,000, which sounded fantastical as it was, now sounded impossible. And Prabhupada had said it before. Impossible is the word used in a fool's dictionary. And my godbrother, the great soul Mahatma Prabhu, he often says, ISKCON's about making the impossible possible. That's what we live for. So then there was this whole progression that happened, and we means we have a team of devotees, and we were going around the world on Zoom talking to devotees, and many people said, let's sit this one out. It'll probably blow over in a few months. And it's like, we don't want to expose the devotees, this, that, the other thing. But what happened was, because we kept trying, so I had no other choice, because I already made the vow, we had to figure out how to make it work. We came up with this saying two sayings. One is, assume it can be done. It's illegal to make excuses. Assume it can be done, because we're not doing it, it's Lord Chaitanya doing it. And therefore, feel free to try anything and everything and think really big, because Lord Chaitanya is signing the checks, not us. And the other one was that workarounds bring turnarounds. That whatever it is, we're going to work around it. We'll never make an ultimatum that it can't be done. We're going to always find a workaround, because it brings us to a realm we've never been before. It could be better than before. And guess what happened? 2020, minus all the details, which I hope comes out in a book we're writing called Assume It Can Be Done, about how it all unfolded, as it was fantastic. We distributed over 20,000 sets of Bhagavatams in 2020. We means the world. And then, as usual, I was sitting there thinking, that was a fluke. It'll never happen again. How can we reproduce this in 2021? So again, rev up the engines, and that's how this whole thing works. Every year you got to restart and say, how are we going to do it again? And again, the increase was substantial, up into the 30,000. And we've been growing around the world, developing capacity for distributing more Srimad Bhagavatams, because the more we do it, the more we realize that it's viable, and then if you bring it up and you talk to people about it and you tell the story, because facts tell but stories sell, and there's a way in which when people hear the story, you're probably bringing the books on the Jaladuta, and then if you just read the book, you'll become pure, and if you give it to somebody else as a gift, you'll just go back to Godhead. And when we tell this, then more and more people have been joining the cause all over the world, and now this year, our goal is to distribute worldwide 68,000 sets of Srimad Bhagavatams. Yeah, you can. Because we're way behind and we need your help. And the reason we're going for 68,000 is because we have something in mind. And that is 2026, we want the capacity to worldwide, in all languages, to distribute at least 100,000 sets of Bhagavatam. What kind of festival will we have here? When the world hits 100,000 sets, we'll be crying. I practically am now. I mean, think about it. 100,000 sets of Bhagavatams around the world. You could fill a football field with sets of Bhagavatams like that. That's millions of dollars. Figure it out, $250 a set, and you distributed 100,000 sets of Bhagavatams. We're in the millions now. People are wasting money all over the world. They're building these useless buildings in California right now. They don't even have people to put in the offices, but they had so much money. I won't mention any names, they're probably listening right now. Our good friends in the corporate world. But people have so much money, they don't know what to do with it, and they're just wasting it. But the greatest investment anybody can make in this lifetime, and we should keep in mind that whatever you give preemptively to Krishna, that's your eternal credit. Whatever you hold on to, even if you're a second late and somebody comes and takes it from you, could be the government, it could be Uncle Dilip, who needs an operation, and you're the only one in the family that has money, so the whole family looks at you and said, you got to pay for him. Your money's gone on Uncle Dilip. But if you give it away before it's credit, if you wait 1 second, you're too late. You're like everybody else. You just got duped by the material energy. You didn't use your chance to parlay something temporary into something eternal. So this campaign is necessary. It's the kind of sacrifice that Prabhupada wanted. He wanted us to use our energies to help people of the world, and the best way to help people of the world is to give them the knowledge of the spiritual world so they can help themselves. Every other kind of help that people are offering, so-called help, is a false philanthropy, because it's not really helping people, it's giving them false hope. People actually need to know who they are, what the goal of life is, and how to attain it, and that's all in the Srimad Bhagavatam, perfectly ordered and perfectly translated and presented. So we're on that campaign now, and we've come here to Baltimore because this is one of the power centers of the world. Your yatra here is a mighty yatra. It's a yatra that is under great leadership, and you have everything lined up here because this is your value system to do good for others. So we came here I came here, my wife came here, we came here just to express our heart's desire that let's join together, and over the next 10, 20 years, let's see if we can cover the earth with the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's an unassailable service. It's something that Srila Prabhupada had personally done himself in India and in America, and then he had specifically asked us to do. And if we do it even a little bit, pledges for distributing sets of Srimad Bhagavatam go like this: should be something more than 0 and not less than 1. Because of what it will do for you to make the pledge. If you go out on a limb and you pledge, I'll pledge at least 1 set of Srimad Bhagavatams, you won't sleep tonight. Because you'll think, now how am I going to make up for this? Or how am I going to sell the set of Srimad Bhagavatam? But what will happen is the energy will come to you by Lord Chaitanya's grace. So thank you for considering my request to please make Baltimore one of the greatest centers for the dissemination of Srimad Bhagavatam in North America.